I'm going to come down here because I'd like to just be away from the podium and be more free about this presentation. I want to thank you all for coming out this morning. I want to thank Tridec. I want to thank Ariva for hosting the event as well. Great seeing lots of old friends. I did grow up in this community. It's always great coming home. This is always just a fun trip to make back here to see real Americans. The biographical information is interesting. I don't want to brag about running a PAC and being a lobbyist and doing government ethics issues, but I do, unfortunately, and actually it's quite an honorable profession, but I often get kind of ribbed about what I do in Washington, D.C. But the key thing is that I'm doing it for good clients like Tridec and the communities in this area, and that's my focus here, is to make sure that we're doing all we can to be good advocates in Washington, D.C. on behalf of these communities. So my job this morning is to talk about this election we just had, what it means for this community, and particularly focus on some issues that Congress is focused on, as well as what the implications might mean for the priorities of this area. So we had this election. This summarizes the results at the presidential level, broken out by states. And the only change that occurred despite this huge election and spending almost $1 billion in funding is two states flipped. Indiana and North Carolina flipped to Republican. They were Democrat last time that Obama won. And that's it. Otherwise, the map remains unchanged. This map shows the results based upon county. And it really underscores how our country is split from urban to rural. You can see little pockets of red, mostly around cities, urban centers, that's Democratic vote, and you see huge spaces of red, which is the rural vote, Republican vote. And it's pretty impressive to me that how the country is very, very split. This geographic split probably is the most pronounced way of describing the country's partisan split right now. In Washington State, you see the same kind of split, by the way, between East and West, politically between the parties. Of course, Obama got 56% in the state, statewide, yet in locally here in Benton County, Romney got 62.3% and Franklin got 61.6%. So again, it kind of underscores the split that exists in the state. There was a pathway for Mitt Romney to win this election. He's down by about 3.4 million votes in the popular vote tally, but in these four states, Florida, Ohio, Virginia, and Colorado, if he had won those four states, he would be president today, or president-elect. And you can see that the totals there are pretty close, and if you add up these vote totals right here, it's about 400,000 votes really made the difference in the election. And you can see why these campaigns get very hyper-focused on a few swing states, because those states can make the difference, obviously, in the election. And these four states will very much be, I'm sure, the swing states next time around. Washington State is not a swing state. It is a very deep blue state, and that's why you don't get bombarded as much as others do with the advertising and all of the attention. So you can count your blessings in that regard. I prepared this graphic just to kind of show you the tracking that occurred during the presidential race. And this is based upon Real Clear Politics. I want to give them a hat tip here because they do a great job. Best website, I think, for politics. They aggregate all the polling data. So it's not just one poll. They take all the polls together and give you an average. And this kind of shows the race. Obviously, red is Romney and blue is the president. And starts here when Romney does clinch the nomination. It has a small little spurt, but he stays behind all the way until the GOP convention. Does catch up briefly, but then the Democratic convention is a nice bump up for the president. He stays ahead, well ahead, for the next month or so. Then the first debate occurs, and Romney, of course, begins to spike, does catch the president, and actually stays ahead briefly for the month, most of the month of October. Then the hurricane comes along, and that does provide some impetus for the president. What I find very interesting here is that on election day, this was the forecast. They had Obama to win by 0.7%, very, very close result. The reality was that Obama won by 2.8%. So toward the end, the Democratic machine was doing a much more effective job getting their vote out, and all the issues kind of worked in his favor. He had the wind behind his back and actually kind of broke open a pretty good win toward the end. But this is a very interesting way of characterizing and tracking the results of the election. Now, in the Congress, in the U.S. Senate, we now have 55 members of the Democratic caucus. And I want to stress that there's 2 right here. These are 2 independents, but they've agreed to caucus with the Democrats. So you have 55 Democrats essential and 45 Republicans. That's a net pickup of 2 for the Democrats in the Senate, which is very surprising, I might add. And I want to suggest that part of it is Patty Murray. She ran the campaign committee this time around. A lot of folks went to her and said, would you please do this? And other folks turned it down. It was thought to be a thankless job and a bad year for the Democrats, but Patty said, sure, I'd be happy to do it, and she delivered big with 2 pickups. And so her clout in D.C. is sky high right now, having produced a really significant win for her colleagues in the Democratic Senate, plus with the White House. Here's the House. And the House, again, it's pretty much status quo. There is roughly 7 pickup on the Democratic side in the House. We're still counting votes in a couple of races, so we don't know for sure, but roughly 7 pickup net for Democrats in the House. But still, the Republicans retain a 235 to 200 margin in the U.S. House. So it's very much status quo, still Speaker Boehner, and that's sort of the Republican focus in terms of their leverage in the process in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington State. The results politically here in Washington State. Again, you see the clear separation between East and West in the state with this congressional delegation. We picked up 1 district. We now have 10 districts in Washington State, the reapportionment. And you'll see here that, that Maria had no problem getting reelected. And of course, Doc had no problem being reelected to his congressional district. So you can see the split. It's now 6 Democrats and 4 Republicans in Washington State's congressional delegation. Specifics about the delegation as a whole. The first point there I cannot overstate. The retirement of Congressman Norm Dix is a significant loss to Washington State. 36 years of seniority in the Congress, on the Appropriations Committee, senior Democrat, and very friendly to the Tri-Cities. He's just been a stalwart. He was always the can-do guy, always the guy you go to first to get the tough issues done. His departure is really a loss for the entire state and particularly for the Tri-Cities. On the flip side, though, Okay, on the flip side, we're gaining seniority. So with losing Norm, we're also gaining seniority. So Senator Patty Murray, as we heard yesterday, will chair the Budget Committee. Gives her, again, a lot more clout, more leverage in the process. She'll be in the Appropriations Committee as well, so she'll actually be doing front end, which is to prepare the budget, and the back end, which is to provide the appropriations based upon the budget resolution. Maria Cantwell, she's next in line based on seniority to the chair, Indian Affairs Committee. And of course, Doc Hastings will continue as the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, getting more seniority, more clout with Republican leadership in the Congress. Doc thought might chair the Rules Committee, but a Texan was there first, and so Doc may do that some other time down the road. But for now, he continues on with a very powerful chairmanship of Natural Resources. We have 3 new delegation members in Washington State, all 3 Democrats. Susan Del Benny, 1st District. This is the old Jay Inslee District. It's changed significantly, but it's the one that Jay Inslee represented. Of course, he's now governor. Derek Kilmer is the new Norm Dix. That's Norm Dix Congressional District. And Denny Heck is the new 10th Congressional District, which is where Olympia is located. We know all 3. I think all 3 are going to be a very helpful addition to our delegation. I think they very much follow the model of Washington State members who are team players and look out for the entire state. I think they'll be good folks to work with in promoting the overall state objectives. Committees, just to reference a few of the important committees for this area. The Senate Authorization Committee for Energy Issues, Energy and Natural Resources. The new chairman is Ron Wyden, just south of us in Oregon. He knows this area very well. I think it's fair to say he's a nuclear energy skeptic. He's very focused on Hanford cleanup, being downriver from the site. Energy and water appropriations. I reference this because this is a very powerful subcommittee. the most powerful for this area, because all the funding for Hanford, cleanup and PNNL, for Bonneville, Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers, goes through energy and water appropriations. It just covers the budget that really defines this area. In the House, the current chairman is Rodney Frelinghuysen from New Jersey. He will likely have the chance to chair defense appropriations, which he'll likely take, creating a vacancy. We're not sure about that yet, but that's my best guess. Next in line is Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho, who represents INEL. Good friend of the Nuclear Cleanup Program and the National Laboratory Program. Would be a good choice there for us, I believe. However, this Congressman Kingston from Georgia could perhaps trump Simpson. He has more full committee seniority, so that's still being looked at, so there's some uncertainty there. In the Senate, Dianne Feinstein of California is the current chair. Will probably stay as the chair of this committee for next year. Not sure yet, but that's my guess. But more importantly, Senator Murray is a member of this subcommittee. And Dianne Feinstein defers to Murray, particularly on Hanford issues. So again, we have an excellent team there with Patty Murray on the Appropriations Subcommittee of Interest. Okay, this is the big issue we're facing back in Washington, D.C. Of course, as we speak right now, the President is convening a meeting with the Congressional leadership about the Fiscal Cliff. It is the overarching issue we're doing back in Washington, D.C. It is pretty much the game the next couple of months and perhaps the first quarter of next year. Now, it's being defined many ways. It could be like this, where you have folks going over the cliff. Here you have, it's hard to read that, but those are lame ducks going over the cliff, like the Congress. And here's the President's Victory Parade, perhaps being spoiled by the fiscal cliff. So this is a pretty high-stakes issue, not just humorous in some respects. So what is the fiscal cliff? It's often talked about, but often not very well defined. It really consists of two big issues. The first is tax. There are several major tax increases that occur January 1st of next year. And technically, it's just expiring tax credits or tax cuts that occur, but the effect is to increase your taxes January 1st. And the second, is sequester. These across-the-board cuts, sequestration, that are indiscriminate. They affect every program pretty much except for entitlements, and they're cut across the board. You all get cut. So the combination gives you the fiscal cliff. On the tax side, this summarizes what the dollars are. It's about $400 billion in tax increases that occur January 1st unless Congress were to do something. And here's on the spending side, sequestration, $109 billion in mandatory spending cuts. Again, sequestration across the board, that 8 to 10% cut for most programs at Hanford, for example, would be cut, and again, everything gets cut. So the combination of these tax increases and spending cuts could have economic implications that are significant. This is the Wells Fargo analysis and CBO analysis that conclude this would cause a recession. So the economy could have a hard time if we don't deal with the fiscal cliff. So the stakes are very high. You also have other issues causing us to focus on some action-forcing events. You have the debt ceiling that will reach early next year. We had a big fight, of course, last summer of 11 about that, and it's a tough issue to figure out how to deal with the debt ceiling. You also have appropriations. Appropriations. We have a CR, as we call it, continuing resolution, in effect right now through March 31st of next year for the federal appropriations process. And of course, that deadline may cause some action-forcing events for next year. Okay, so what are the scenarios for the fiscal cliff? There's really three of them. You could do nothing and go over the cliff. And that may seem strange. Why would you even consider doing that given the significant negative implications? The problem here is that these are tough issues. We've been fighting these issues now for 2 or 3 years in Congress, and Congress has to do something. If they do nothing, we go over the cliff. And Congress is tough doing things. They're much better doing nothing, quite frankly. So they actually have to pass something that says no sequestration or something that reinstates the tax cuts. So that's why it's a tough issue. You also have the chance for a grand bargain. We almost had that with Speaker Boehner and this president about 1.5 years ago, And that's today's discussion at the White House, is there the parameters they can set to do a grand bargain, which is a combination of revenue, tax cuts, not tax cuts, revenue, which would be tax increases, I'm sorry, spending cuts, and entitlement cuts. And if they could do it as a comprehensive package, does that become the grand compromise they could all come together on and they can move forward? That'll be tough to do during a lame duck session, which is a very compressed time period, so it may have to wait until next spring. Now, another option here is just kick the can down the road, which is a very familiar option on Capitol Hill, and that is just to kind of freeze the status quo and have a 3-month or 1 year reprieve to give you time to develop a comprehensive approach, which might be the grand bargain, also might be like tax reform as well. So what will Congress do? Well, unfortunately, my guess is probably this, that they will follow the true form here and just kick the can down the road. They'll try very hard, but it's just very difficult to get things done during a lame duck session of any kind of consequence. Now, they may again get the framework established to do a grand compromise, but still they'll have to do all the details about that next year. Here are some other issues, just a kind of mosaic of other legislation pending in Congress we're focused on that you'll see being played out mostly next year. But starting with the lame duck session, these are 3 issues that are still in play for the lame duck. This is, again, beyond Fiscal Cliff. We're not talking about some other legislation. The first is the appropriations bill for FY13. Staff are pre-conferencing, have been doing so for about 6 weeks. Energy and water appropriations, again, a key bill for us, is in the mix right now, and we look pretty good, I think, on Hanford funding in particular. The problem there is that the leadership of the House, Senate have yet to bless doing an omnibus appropriations bill during the lame duck session. Again, there's no action-forcing event because the CR goes through March of next year. So it may not get done, quite frankly, but they're still trying to. And it's good for us to be in that game because what number they set right now will probably be the starting point for negotiations next year. You also have defense authorizations. Very important for our region too because the Hanford budget is authorized by Armed Services Committee as part of the National Defense Authorization Bill. They're also pre-conferencing at the staff level on this legislation. As I point out here, history supports getting it done because they've had 51 consecutive years of doing a national authorization bill for defense. So I would hope that they would have history continue and they'd finally get that bill done during the lame duck session. I might add that Congressman Adam Smith, who's on the west side, is the ranking Democrat on this committee. He's been very helpful to us, very responsive, as is Congressman Rick Larson, also very friendly to the Tri-Cities, is on this committee of jurisdiction. We have the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill expired in September. A lot of concern about that, and they're going to try very hard during the lame duck session to find a way to rescue the Farm Bill. They have to move a separate House bill. They could do Fiscal Cliff as a vehicle for it, or a short-term extension and get it done next year. But there'll probably be some effort to get the Farm Bill taken care of during this lame duck session. Now, what's not done during the lame duck, the appropriations and defense authorizations and the Farm Bill, will carry over and become very pertinent for the next Congress. But at least they'll try to get these 3 done before the Christmas holiday. Now, for next year, assuming they can get Fiscal Cliff resolved, the priority will be tax reform. Comprehensive overhaul of the tax code. Most comprehensive since 1986. I see both parties coming together on this. There's a huge pent-up frustration to get this done. And the philosophy that underpins this tax reform is to broaden the base and reduce tax expenditures. What that means is you want to get the base as broad and flat as possible, eliminate deductions and credits, and if you have a big, broad base, you might be able to go ahead and even do tax cuts or at least not have tax rate increases. But to pay for that, you have to deal with these tax expenditures. And so what are those? Well, on the individual side, you have things like mortgage deduction, you have the sales tax deduction, big issue for Washington State, you have the charitable deductions, so you have lots of deductions here that individuals currently utilize. On the business side, you have lots of business taxes. You have the R&D tax credit, renewable energy tax incentives, all of which could be in play as Congress looks at trying to minimize, cut back on tax expenditures and have a broader base to afford, hopefully, tax rate reductions. Other legislative issues and priorities, immigration reform, mentioned by the President's press conference a couple days ago. Tough issue, very tough issue, politically polarizing issue. I think they'll make a try, though, to get something done on the immigration area. And a big part of that, of course, is the guest worker program, very important for our area for immigrant workers. Transportation, another high priority. There's a short-term extension currently in place that Congress got done last year. It expires, though, and there's a lot of frustration about we need to have a bigger program to do larger highway and transit programs. And to do that, you have to find some new revenue, gas tax or some other programs to create more funding stream to allow you to go ahead and do more transportation projects. So those are the congressional priorities. And if you're not worried about Congress, you should worry about this, which is the regulatory agenda. Lots of stuff going on that's not congressionally focused. It's done by the agencies of the federal government. And you can see there's lots of regulations currently in the mix, particularly at EPA, which is right here. And many are in the proposed rulemaking phase. Some are final. Many are still in draft form. But so there'll be a lot of stuff here going on as well that could be very consequential for this region. Thank you all for your time and your patience, and I look forward to your questions. And I want to have some questions here because I'm very anxious to hear your concerns. But more importantly, that's the best way for me to learn as well, and hopefully to be more particular about your concerns. Yes.
You mentioned the pent-up frustration, and your insight is amazing. I think Tridec is really to be complimented for bringing you here. You know, we hear so much stuff, but now we're kind of hearing it from someone who's deeply involved in the community and Tridec. So, having said that, my concern is small businesses, because a lot of the rhetoric and the polarization and potentially frustration comes out of this soaking the rich. Well, small businesses, and small businesses are such a big deal going forward, and in this community there's such a tremendous opportunity for them with everything in place, as you know better than I. Who is representing small businesses in Washington and talking for them? They can't probably afford their own lobbyists. They're hit by a lot of these things. And one last piece of this you didn't have time to talk about in Fiscal Cliff is the estate tax exemption.
Mm-hmm.
If you see business owners who are absolutely, if it goes back to $1 million and they try and transfer their business to their employees, their kids, and they get nailed by that, how's that going to help anybody?
Yeah, great questions. On small business, you're right that most small companies cannot afford to have a lobbyist, so they rely upon associations, and there are some very powerful associations in Washington, D.C. that do represent small businesses. There's also committees. There's the separate House and Senate small business committees. So they actually have a separate congressional focus on their issues that's very helpful. So I think that actually small business issues are pretty well represented in Washington, D.C. And of course, most congressmen are very anxious to talk about small business. You saw both presidential candidates always mention small business as part of their priorities, and no one wanted to cut funding or somehow increase taxes on small business owners because they are the job creators in the community. I think both sides sort of get that. So I think you're pretty well served. Now, having said that, the fiscal cliff issues are serious, and I'm no tax expert, but as I understand part of this, many small business owners, of course, get mixed in with the higher income tax issue. And that's a real concern. And I know Speaker Boehner's talked about that, and he's tried to differentiate the millionaire individual versus the small business owner, who both get nailed paying the same high tax rate. And so it would not surprise me that if they cut a deal on that issue, they might find some way to differentiate the small business owner and allow that person to avoid the higher income tax rate increase versus other people. That's just a speculation, but I think you're pretty well served. I think you guys are well represented, pretty strong support politically in Washington, D.C. Estate taxes, again, a good issue and an important issue that's often overlooked, and it's often not dealt with because it always gets pushed aside as one of these extensions, and it's in play for the fiscal cliff and as part of these tax extensions for next year. Don't have an answer for that one as well, but the revenue is huge, and that's part of the problem here is the tax writing committees have to pay for all this stuff, and the estate tax issue provides significant revenue implications. So they'll work on it. I don't know what the answer is, but again, I think a lot of folks are being well served with their representation in Washington, D.C. to work those issues. Yes?
Tim, there's been a lot of national reporting about the dire consequences of going off the fiscal.
Right.
But isn't the kicking the can down the road option almost as bad in terms of the stock market, in terms of the nation's credit rating, and going back into recession?
Great question. I think that's right, by the way. So the issue is, if you kick the can down the road, what can you do now to send the right signal to the markets that we're serious about doing this for next year? So if you can't get the big deal done this year, which is my bet, hopefully, and again, today's meeting at the White House will lay out the parameters for this, they'll figure out a way to say, okay, we'll get the details done for next year, but we will agree today that we're going to have this level of spending cut, we're going to have these tax issues dealt with. They'll kind of lay out a game plan that ensures you get to completion. Now, we've seen it before. We had the super committee last year, which was a very similar concept. We'll go ahead and agree at a top line to do certain things, commit to it, and have a committee do the details. The committee, of course, did not get there. They could not find the answers. Of course, Patty Murray chaired that committee, did a wonderful job under tough situations, but it was just an impossible task. So you raised the right question, and the markets are pretty savvy about this. And I think they're going to look for something more than we've seen before. They're going to say, okay, show us the goods here. Show us for sure you're serious about deficit reduction, that you're not going to just simply, as you say, kick the can down the road and keep kicking it. We need to have a clear plan that we can kick it down the road just for 3 months or just for 6 months, knowing that you will get it done next year. And that's going to be tough. And quite frankly, the markets may help us, because if the markets send a signal that what's being proposed perhaps today by the White House didn't do it, then that may kick them back to go, okay, we have to do more because we didn't appease the market. So in a sense, you may have a self-correcting exercise where the markets help the politicians make the right decisions. Great question. Yes?
Tim, what do you see happening with the Bush tax credit? They've got a month and a half or so to decide on it. If no action is taken, how do you think that affects the fiscal cliff?
Bush tax credits?
Yeah.
You mean the tax rate issues? Right. Well, that's part of that's the centerpiece of the fiscal cliff, and that's the whole Obama campaign issue that was used very effectively by his team. It's hard to say where it's all going to end up. I mean, the Bush tax rate reductions, of course, expire December 31st. I suspect that there's consensus to extend them for middle-income, lower-income taxpayers. The whole issue is the top 2 brackets, the top 2%, and that issue is totally up in the air.
So you don't see an extension of the tax credit?
Yeah, when you say tax credits, you mean the tax rate reductions?
Right.
Now, hard to say, but again, my theory is that they will kick the can down the road, which would mean that they would extend the tax rate reductions. I think the issue that's unresolved, Patty Murray is a big player in this issue right now, is if they do for all taxpayers at all levels, or if they decide to take the upper income 1-2% and decide not to extend those tax reductions. That issue is still very much open right now, and that is actually a centerpiece of discussions today at the White House, and quite frankly is the issue which is going to probably have both sides get a little difficult in the negotiate. I mean, the president has been saying, I won the election, I used this issue at my campaign, the voters voted to essentially have the higher income folks pay more. That'll be his point. Speaker Boehner will continue to say, no, those people are job creators, and you'll have economic negative implications if you don't also extend their tax rate reductions. And it's going to be a tough fight. Tough fight. Maybe advantage Democrats, quite frankly, on the issue as we speak, but I see a lot of more to play out there.
Thanks.
Yes?
Do you think we have a chance to see our Manhattan Project National Park bill pass in the next session?
Great question. I hope it does pass. We're working the issue pretty aggressively, as you know, Doc is as well. Doc rolled the dice and tried to pass the bill on suspension back in October. Almost prevailed. What he tried to do, just to kind of give you some of the inside stuff, is that he tried to expedite the process, which requires a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules and pass a bill. He came up short because the bill does cost some money, although it's a very modest amount of money. And therefore he has to try it again. If the bill goes to the floor under a rule, which is straight up vote, he'll win because he won the first time. He got a majority vote. So it'll pass the House. The issue is the Senate. And that's totally unresolved right now. I mean, maybe you folks have some ideas about this, but the Senate is really having a difficult time passing anything right now. Nothing personal, David. And so it's hard to say. I think that Doc feels confident he can get the bill through the House, but he's a little frustrated about whether the Senate can take the bill up. Bingaman, who chairs the committee that Ron Wyden will chair next year, is still there. He has a stake because, of course, New Mexico is one of the 3 communities that has part of the national park designation. I just don't know whether he's going to focus on the issue and make it a priority at the end. If he were, it has a shot. But I haven't seen much there, quite frankly. I think there's been a sense that we haven't quite got the Senate to play as aggressively as the House has thus far in this process. Don't know. If we don't do it this year, we'll be back next year. It'll be an issue for next year, and we can go see Ron Wyden and see what Ron Wyden's views on the issue are. Yes?
It appears we had this huge anticlimactic finish. I mean, it was almost like a gunfight, everybody shooting at each other, and the dust settles, and everybody's still here. So what's the mood in Washington, D.C.? I mean, what do people feel? Isn't sure everybody has a mandate? What are they thinking?
I like your metaphor. Because we spent all this money and had these candidates around the country for months and months and had the media go nuts and all this suspense. When it was all said and done, it was a status quo election. I mean, the president's reelected, Senate's still Democrat, House is still Republican. The mood in D.C. right now, I think, is really unsettled. I think a lot of folks just don't know yet what to do. Both sides can claim some margin of victory. I mean, the Democrats say, yeah, we won the election, president's reelected, we've got seats in the Senate. They feel somewhat fortified that their arguments prevailed, and therefore they have more leverage in the process. On the flip side, House Republicans say, we're fine. We kept a good majority in the House, and we don't feel we should capitulate to the president. Both parties have a base problem. Both sides play to their base right now. And the middle, what's left of the middle is very, very small. In the House in particular, there was a significant erosion of the middle. A lot of moderate members on both sides lost. And so basically you have hard right and hard left in the Congress. So that makes it difficult. And it's just hard to know what's going to happen. I mean, there is a little bit of euphoria because the election's over and we have some new members and there's a sense about freshness and renewal, which is always good. But today, as we speak, have a negotiation in the White House, we'll see. We might know here in the next hour or two if they give us a signal, if they're going to work as a group and be bipartisan, or they're going to sort of take their various camps and not have a resolution. I just don't have a good answer for you at this point.
Tim, could you describe what's happening with Norm Dix's staff right now?
Well, again, I just cannot say more good things about Congressman Norm Dix and how he's been so valuable for our state delegation. And again, his soft spot for the Tri-Cities is very apparent. So that's just wonderful. Norm's staff, who are all veterans, are being assaulted through delegations throughout the other members. So, for example, I mentioned Congressman-elect Denny Heck, who was on our firm a couple of days ago. His 2 top staffers, Chief of Staff and his Ledge Director, are going to be former Norm Dix staffers, which is great. That provides lots of continuity. These staffers know the game. They've had the rodeo before. And so they're going to be very, very helpful to give us knowledge and allow us to continue on. Both staffers know the community, know us, and so that's very, very good news. I think that Derek Kilmer, who's yet to announce his senior staff, will also probably follow that role and have a strong tether and continuity to Congressman Norm Dix. So again, his legacy lives on as his well-seasoned, prepared, and expert staff will stay helping Washington State.
And physically, I mean, their offices, they've got to move out, et cetera.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Norm, his office is gone on December 1st. He'll have a small little cubbyhole in the Capitol building. But the way it works is that Norm has no more office, so his staff have no place to go, effective December 1st. It's kind of interesting. They've been boxing up stuff that was there a few days ago, all this memorabilia and all these papers. It's really a pretty big enterprise after 36 years of being in the Congress. So yeah, it's a part of the intrigue we're seeing in Washington, D.C. is trying to preserve that legacy for Norm. But again, the good news is that his staff will continue on and provide continuing benefits for our delegation. Yes?
What do you see were the impacts of the far right, the Tea Party movement to politics in this election and into the future?
What's the impact?
Yes.
Well, it's a tough question. I want to avoid getting myself in trouble about that.
Go, Tim.
I was here 2 years ago, and I think I said that those who underestimate the Tea Party do so at their own peril. I think it's a very potent force politically. I think it's fair to say that perhaps it's not as potent as it was, say, 2 years ago. But the undercurrents are still very, very apparent. And it's not necessarily partisan. There's a lot of frustration out there. A lot of people feel they're not part of the process, that things are broken badly in Washington, D.C. I can't disagree, quite frankly. And so various political movements get going based upon that, based upon not so much Republican but conservative constitutional principles, and more power to them. That's what the process is supposed to work. So they're a powerful force in Washington, D.C. Are they as powerful as they were 2 years ago? Maybe not. But still, I think it's a very, very important factor in the electorate for folks to work with and appreciate, and not to necessarily diminish their role. All sides, have their perspectives. The Democrats have a very far left perspective. And all parties historically have their bases and their left flank or right flank. So the art of politics is to find a way to have all those who want to participate, to feel they're getting something out of the process, contribute to the process, and hopefully make good policy for the country. And so the issue is, hopefully that's going to be what we do. I mean, that sounds good, I know, and maybe it's sophomoric in saying it that way, but hopefully, the people who make decisions will try to factor in all of these diverse constituencies and make the right choice to keep the public doing the right thing, avoiding a fiscal cliff, but also not sacrificing principles and not making decisions that you feel are detrimental to your core convictions.
You got time for a couple more questions. I saw Mike over here.
Tim, I wasn't aware of the Farm Bill issue. How do you think that affects our local agricultural business here?
Well, this area, as you well know, is not as Farm Bill dependent as others because we don't have the commodity crops like you have in the Midwest, for example. We have more specialty crops in this area. So it's not as significant. I think it's more of almost a symbolic issue that we should have a Farm Bill. We got to have an overall organic program for our agricultural programs, and we don't right now. It expired. So I think that's part of what's going on is we just need to get our house in order and have an authorization statute put back together again that can help us. I'm not sure they'll get it done this year, but they again may at least get an extension to allow the programs to carry on until next year to allow them to go ahead and do the fine print and modifying a Farm Bill. So I don't mean to dance around your question. The details are just to be determined and what the implications are for this region. But the Farm Bill is not as important for inland Northwest as it is, say, for Iowa, for example. Mike?
Tim, because of the complexity, sooner or later something does have to happen with regard to the budget. Do you see either Simpson Bowles, Domenici Rippin, or the Gang of Six, any of those proposals in the past having more traction as being a basis for that solution?
I think in general they all have more traction. Particularly if the President and Speaker Boehner say, okay, we need to find a deal here, and if they agree to go after the broad, grand compromise, then the issue is which of these proposals makes the most sense. And you've mentioned the three that are most obvious, quite frankly, and it might be an amalgamation of the three. It's hard to say which of the three is the one that's favored right now. I might add that the Gang of Six, or now Gang of Eight, in the Senate has some traction because you have senators who are doing it. So they're actually going to be there voting on it. They understand a bit more about the politics of what's doable, realistic in the U.S. Senate. It's bipartisan. It's an even mixture of Democrats and Republicans. So if I had to pick one of the three, I think that one might have a bit more of a leg up just because the guys doing it are the players in the process already, as opposed to those outside the Congress.
What's the headline difference between them?
Well, there really isn't. I mean, all three preach the philosophy of balance, that you have to do all three, which is taxes or revenue, spending cuts, and entitlements. The last one is the tough one, by the way, because that's where the real money is entitlements. But you have to have all three to have a balanced package. A package is going to get you trillions of dollars. You need trillions, not just billions. You need $4 or $5 trillion in reduction in deficit. It's what you need over the next 5-10 years. So all three preach that. it's hard to say if there's any kind of distinguishing element of the three proposals. That they're all very similar in terms of that philosophy. That some differ somewhat in terms of being a little less on tax, a bit more on entitlements, a bit more on spending cuts here or there. Again, those are probably details. I think it would just be important to have the big leadership, the White House and the Congressional leadership, just to say, okay, fundamentally, we have to go ahead and do something like that, and then they can go ahead and work out those details later on.
All right, please join me in thanking Tim.
Thank you very much.